Thank you so much for coming. My name is Tu-Sheng Wing. I'm an assistant professor of educational leadership and policy studies at IUPUI here in Indianapolis. I am very honored and pleased to provide a brief introduction of our keynote speaker for the University Council for Educational Administration's second annual International Summit. Ms. Ailatiu Mutraw is a former refugee from Burma and a member of the Korean ethnic nationality. Ms. Mutraw fled from Burma with her family to a refugee camp on the Thai-Burma border following the 1988 military coup. She finished her secondary school education in the liberated region of Burma in a school run by the Korean Revolution. In 1993, Ms. Mutraw came to the United States and attended Bakersfield College and then San Francisco State University, where she studied speech and communication studies. She earned a Master in Law degree at Indiana University and is currently working on a doctorate focusing on federalism and constitutional law. In the early 2000s, Ms. Mutraw joined the Burmese government in exile as the head of the Women's Department for the National Coalition Government of the Union Burma, prior to becoming Director of Communications for the Free Burma Coalition. During this time, she engaged with the United Nations Human Rights Commission, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, and the Commission on the Status of Women. Her writing appears in the Thailand-based Irrawaddy and the Washington-based Foreign Policy in Focus. She is the author of Stories of Resilience and Hope, reflecting on ethnicity, war, and liberation struggle in Burma. In 2007, Ms. Mutraw co-founded the Going Home Where We Belong program to organize Karen and Karenni refugees living abroad. The program is focused on reconnecting with the homeland, sharing experiences and knowledge, as well as providing formal learning opportunities. More recently, as Burma transitions to democracy, Ms. Mutraw has been intimately involved in helping to negotiate the peace in Burma and ensuring recognition of the rights of Burma's ethnic minorities who've suffered under military regime. Ms. Mutraw is co-founder and president of the Burmese Community Center for Education, based in Indianapolis, and director of the BCCE Community Self-Empowerment Program. Through this grassroots organization, she, Mr. Nene Flo, who is at the back, and other founding members support the resettlement of former refugees from Burma through an ethic grounded in education as a liberatory practice. Central to that ethic is the engagement and development of a new generation of leaders, a number of whom are here today to share their work with you. As the daughter of former refugees, I know something of the challenges of fleeing a war-torn homeland to make a place in a new country. I know the ways that our communities can be made vulnerable, as well as the strength of spirit that enables us to not only survive, but to thrive. Through my research, I have come to understand that efforts like Ms. Mutraw's to build community here while maintaining a presence in and a responsibility to her homeland are both uncommon and enormously important to our communities and to our nations. I ask that you join me in welcoming Ms. Ailatiu Mutraw.
Liberty without learning is always in peril, and learning without liberty is always in vain. Any educated citizen who seeks to subvert the law, to suppress freedom, or to subject other human beings to acts that are less than human, degrades his heritage, ignores his learning, and betrays his obligation, said President John F. Kennedy in 1963. Good morning. I came from Burma, as you heard in the introduction, a country once under the British rule for over 100 years. During the independence struggle in 1930s and 40s, the students' leader like General Aung San, the father of Aung San Suu Kyi, and who is also known as the architect of Burma's independence, and other leaders alike. They fought against the British rule in every way they could imagine. They fought against the education system and everything pertaining education at the time because the education provided only to generate the colonial machine and prolong the British rule. They argued that reading such as, and I translated this into English loosely, money came back from the market. Bao is swimming. Do not pick young zucchinis. Reading as such did not advance the Burmese learning intellectually or cognitively. Those who went to schools under British education system were mocked, belittled, and labeled unpatriotic because they were receiving and promoting slave education. So was the story of Burma's independence struggle that we learned in high school. What did the students learn after Burma got independence then? I fled from Burma, my hometown, altogether from Burma after a military coup in 1988. Then with my family, our fleeing plight ended in the United States through resettlement program in 1993. Since, I have been going back to the refugee camps in Thailand as well as in Burma yearly for the lack of a better term to teach. What I basically do is share what I've learned from English reading comprehension, writing, etc. to international relations, federalism, constitutional law, anything that I have learned and I felt it's important to share. That's what I have been doing. One time for one of the English courses that I taught, I thought I would consult the English textbook for a post-high school course. I thought I would consult the English textbook, second year college level English textbook. And there I saw this essay entitled A Journey by Train, written out for students to learn writing. I was outraged. There was nothing surprising. After all, the entire country was under military dictatorship that seized power violently. So, education is to. I came to thinking education, the paradox, based on the scenarios of the two different eras in Burma, during the independence movement and during the military coup, the kind of education the Burmese people generally received, and we fought against it. I find myself asking. To this date, I still find myself asking question, education for what? Which I thought I had the answer 20 years ago. But when I was asked to do this keynote speech, it's a time where I'm still asking myself, education for what? And I think the answer for me is education for freedom. But then the new question, I have been bothered by the new question, whose freedom? While I cannot possibly speak for every single person of 58 million population in Burma, I can confidently say that the voice I will share today is the voice of the community I had come from and one I continue to identify myself with. Our appreciation of education is very simple. Having survived over 100 years of British colonial rule and still undergoing over 65 years of civil war, any attempt to reconstruct that country most definitely demands a serious consideration for education. Burma gained independence from British in 1948, and in 1949, civil war broke out, and it continues to this day. The devastations and casualties are, needless to mention, despicable and endless. The country's infrastructures have collapsed in every aspect. To find an adequate and appropriate measure for reconstructing this nation, we must first determine the nature and extent of the destruction. The acts of depriving a child from his right to education is not the only damage done to him, nor are the burning of his village, the looting of his family's belongings, nor are the killing of his parents or the raping of his sisters. Though heavy and grievous to bear, they are terrible enough, but deeper down and more terrible still are the other destructions that caused by both the military rule and the oppression. And the result of such wrongs has destroyed not only the oppressed, but also the oppressors in our country. Therefore, the kind of education needed should not only typically equip citizens with skills to add and subtract, or skills to hack and track our friends and foes, or skills to build breathtaking buildings and bridges, all of which would constitute a mere industrial education, but also should enable men to discuss courageously the problems of their context. And I'm sure you know where this came from. To intervene in the context, it would warn men the dangers of the time and offer them the confidence and the strength to confront those dangers instead of surrendering their sense of self through submission to the decision of others. From Paulo Freire. We need critical education. Recognizing slavery as a curse, to both races, the black and white, Booker T. Washington once analyzed the industrial training in slavery as crude and was given for the selfish purposes. He argued that training of such did not answer the highest ends because there was an absence of mental training in connection with the training of the hands. If we are with Freire or with Booker T. Washington on the actual effect of the oppression, we must also agree that reconstructing a nation with Burma's experience would require us to see education beyond industrial training. As this convention's theme means to capture the importance of the role of community in education, and more appropriately so, the International Summit's endeavor to better understand the school leadership and preparation of school leaders by taking challenges in the historical context. I believe learning stories from the experience of my community will inform you of how far we as educated and educators alike have come and how far yet we still need to go. After I agreed to do this keynote address, I was asked to give the title of my keynote. Without having much time to think about, I gave the title that had been troubling my mind for a long time for different reasons: Liberation Education. To further elaborate on the title I came up in haste, I would like to share the works that I have been involved with in two different continents, one back home in Burma, conflict zone, and the other here in Indianapolis. To be sure, both works are a direct answer, a response to the conscientious response, I would like to say, to the call of education. Through my learning, I came to realize and agree with the finding of Frederick Douglass that education is incompatible with oppression of any kind. So education for what? So the answer for me remains education for liberation. Education, on the other hand, and I quote, means emancipation. It means light and liberty. It means the uplifting of the soul of men into the glorious light of truth. The light only by which men can be free. To deny education to any people is one of the greatest crimes against human nature. It is to deny them the means of freedom and the rightful pursuit of happiness, and to defeat the very end of their being. And this is by Frederick Douglass back in 1894. If education is incompatible with oppression of any kind, it can only be for liberation then. Education is something that human beings naturally desire whether or not they can articulate it. And it doesn't question race, gender, or sexual orientation or anything as such. As long as we are human beings, consider ourselves human beings, we desire education. It is crucial to our personal development for our own social consciousness and our role in the liberation struggle of our people respectively. I would like to believe that no one knowingly would like to be stuck in the mental darkness. After teaching himself to read while in prison, Malcolm X proclaimed, "I never had been so truly free in my life. Reading had changed forever the course of my life. The ability to read awoke inside me some long dormant craving to be mentally alive." I was raised by parents who are both educators. So I grew up hearing the word education just as many times as I heard my name being called. Here I should like to emphasize the way we looked at education in Burma is different from the way education is generally perceived in the United States. For sure, from my parents, I had never heard of education as a means to a better paid job or as a tool for workforce development, for example. In other words, I did not have any idea of industrial education. But after 20 years in the United States, I have come to understand a little better as to why education is seen that way in the United States and perhaps in other developed countries, and why we did not see the same in Burma. And that has to do, again, with the historical context in Burma, perhaps. So here, so what do I do with education? Like Dusun introduced, we started, since I came to this country, and since 1994 December, I started going back to refugee camp in Thailand, and further, I wasn't supposed to go back to Burma, or I wasn't supposed to be able to go back into Burma. But at the same time, I struggled with this, I debated with the idea that that's my country, that's my native land, that's the land I was born in. I should be able to go back there anytime I wanted to. So I allowed myself to sneak into Burma. Every year I did that. And after 1 year in 2009, as I prepared for my annual trip home, I started talking to my colleague, Mutraw, who is behind, at the back. We started brainstorming about creating a program where other Burmese expats can join us. So was born this program called Going Home Where We Belong, with the objectives to share, to learn, and to bond. And we go home particularly in the conflict-affected areas where education is in dire need. Struggle against an army with 400 men is just one of the most visible obstacles. With every war comes instability and uncertainties beyond words. Under such circumstances, a regular access to education, if it exists, has become a luxury. Yet, like what Douglas observed through his holding of a Sabbath school, while it is difficult to measure any tangible outcome of our works, we find ourselves responsible to share with those whose minds are starved by the military regime and who feel stuck in the mental darkness imposed upon them by the military rule. The courage to undertake such a challenging task lies in the knowing of how people enjoy to learn. So that's what we have been doing yearly. And here in the United States, like from my experience, I learned education also doesn't know boundaries. Sharing education certainly does not have boundaries. We started this center, Burmese Community Center for Education, 3 years ago. The center was founded precisely to tackle the challenges faced by people who fled from Burma in search of freedom, individually and collectively. For these people, the struggle for freedom continues in the United States, perhaps even harder in different formats. Theirs is a challenge intensified by having to discern everything new, from language to lifestyle. Having survived the unspeakable horrors in the war zone and the bleakest period of hopelessness in refugee camps was only initial test to their endurance. To be resettling in the first world countries like the United States, for these people is, if anything, an unkind experience. Coming from a place where getting education was made impossible by the war, to a country where education is the essential mode of decent survival. Majority of our people in our community have very little or no formal education before coming to the United States. Many of them are completely illiterate. Any program intended to assist and empower these people can only be achieved through approaching education from both and informal aspects, formal and informal aspects. Conventional learning method would hardly address their need or tackle the problems they face. But without learning, there is no other way to empower them. Unless they are empowered, their dream for freedom is not in sight. At our center, we do everything from reading their letters from the hospital to filling up application forms for them either for employment or for government assistance, to providing trainings and workshops to educate them about the law and the new environment they live in. So I continue to learn that education is a constant struggle, just as much as a struggle for liberation. Almost 18 years ago, I was introduced to a book called The Pedagogy of the Oppressed, as I prepared to do volunteer work in El Salvador and Nicaragua. I read the book a semester before summer that I was leaving. I got headache and agitation after reading, but did not complain it to the friend who introduced me, who made me to read, who was also my mentor. I neither understood nor remembered much of what I read, but one thought, that education as a practice of freedom sticks. Especially in the discourse of liberation struggle by the ethnic minorities in Burma, a more troubling question like freedom for whom persists. After attaining education, it is still possible, like President Kennedy said, that an educated citizen would seek to subvert the law, to suppress the freedom of others, or to subject other human beings to acts that are less than human. However, we should never underestimate the power of education. Just as much as Mr. Douglas found his freedom in education, I found mine in the education that I received. Saying I found my freedom, I should admit that, however, the experience of preparing this liberation education talks with a very healthy and active 6-month-old son who is at the back was quite oppressive. We must strive to seek and provide the kind of education, critical education, so that we set ourselves free and we can always achieve greater freedom. And I said we should not underestimate the power of education, even though we don't know how a person who got education would turn out at the end of the day. But still, I believe in my mind, I believe that if a person truly gets education, that is when a person truly lives his human experience. You know, many years, 100 years ago, Frederick Douglass realized the importance of education, even before he got education from his master. He learned from his master, who did not want him to get education because the master was so afraid, so fearful that if the slave got education, what would happen? So he realized then, before he got education, he realized that's exactly what he needed, that's exactly what he wanted. And as I pursue education and little that I have got, and the life that I have lived, I continue to believe very strongly the power of education is magical. And it's very important for us to continue to strive, seeking and providing critical education so that we can also achieve, we can also attain a greater humanity that I believe the desire that we all share. Thank you very much.